Alright, so last week I alluded to the idea of going into Elmore Leonard territory, and what better way to do that than these two, which, like I was saying before, I don't usually like to do the movie and its sequel sort of thing while doing this. Like, I probably could have done Out of Sight instead of Be Cool, but as far as, compare and contrast, I figure this would be... There's other things we can do with Out of Sight, I'm sure, and which I will be very excited to get to before too long. But as far as these go, I guess it's also because that just in a change in medium in regards to what they're focusing on, whether it be the movie industry or the music industry, it's weird how differently the movies come out while kind of trying to do the same thing in the same style, regardless of what it is that it's covering, with a lot of the same characters. Well, a handful of the same characters. It's yeah, you see Danny DeVito on the cover of Be Cool pretending he's in this movie, but so I actually want to start with Get Shorty and go into that because I think the reason I was like, well, if we're gonna do an Elmore Leonard thing, it should be Get Shorty, is because there are a number of things that you can associate with Elmore Leonard. Like, you can go into into his westerns, for instance, but it seems like he's mainly associated with this sort of kind of slick crime thing with like the really cool dialogue and stuff like that. And when I think of his name, you can think of stuff like Out of Sight or Jackie Brown, which Tarantino based off of Rum Punch. But regardless of how many movies are like this and really fit that tone in that really perfect way, like Out of Sight and Jackie Brown do as well, whenever I hear the name Elmer Leonard, the very first thing I think of is Get Shorty. And not even the book. When I think of Elmer Leonard's name, I think of this movie before anything else. And when you go into that, there is, when I'm talking about like the style and the slickness of it, is this was kind of a time before, or at least a resurgence in those movies that tried really hard to be slick and cool, but just kind of came off in a very... It was very transparent that that's what they were going for, and then it doesn't really hit in that way. This movie feels so effortlessly cool. It's as cool as it is, and it doesn't have to try to get to that. And Soderbergh did kind of carry that over when he made Out of Sight a few years later, but Sonnenfeld really nailed this, and he seems like a very interesting choice when you look at the fact that this was him fresh off the Addams Family movies and some of the movies he would go on to do. But something about, he was able to find just the perfect style to bring this to life, and it actually feels like Leonard's writing just on screen. And I guess a lot of that is a credit also to Travolta, because to my understanding, the dialogue was very movie-ified when it was translated to the script, and I guess it was Travolta that had said, we need to keep the dialogue pretty much as it is in the book, because I guess they really dumbed down the lines and just made them a lot more straightforward, and didn't kind of have that sort of... Like I said, in another person's hands, it might seem a bit over the top, or the trying too hard to be cool thing, when you can say one sentence in 5 words, you can say one sentence in 15 words. And it definitely brings out the whole style of the movie as a whole. So, and talking about Travolta, this was, because obviously he had the enormous resurgence with Pulp Fiction, and this was pretty much his next role after that, which was just kind of the perfect part to take on right after, especially, apparently, he was initially going to turn the movie down, and it was Tarantino that talked him into it, interestingly enough. And yeah, because, I mean, if it wasn't, if Chili Palmer wasn't an Elmore Leonard character, he probably eventually would have been a Tarantino character. So, which made Tarantino suited so much to Rum Punch. But it's talking about these opening scenes with his interactions with Ray Bones, and there's something about the filmmaking of the movie itself that suits the smoothness that it's going for, where you have the whole back and forth with the coat thing, and these sort of brief interactions that always end up with Bones going to the hospital for one reason or another. And it's this one moment, when I talk about like the filmmaking style, what I mean is this moment, this whole confrontation of him getting the coat back the first time, where the camera just comes in, and the camera doesn't even really move. It is just like a quick 10 seconds of Ray opening the door, Chili punching him, walking in. The jacket's right there on a chair in the shot, and he can just pick it up and walk out before Ray can even retaliate. And just that alone is like the perfect opening moments of this movie. And then you top that off with the hands kind of changing in regards to who it is that Chili works for. And when you see about this movie and the way it goes into the movie industry also is, and through Chili's character, there's just such a love of movies going on, like kind of in the background, but also kind of in the foreground also, depending on the scene. So when you get scenes like when Ray is warned that, nothing can be done about Chili while Momo's alive, Momo being like the big boss that's in charge of him before, and ultimately his death is going to mean that Ray is in charge of Chili now. But the thing that seems to foreshadow this, which in no way can be a coincidence, especially with how movie-loving this movie is that Ray is informed of this shortly before Momo's death by Alex Rocco, and Alex Rocco is telling him this while he's getting a massage. And if you recall, Alex Rocco obviously played Mo Green in The Godfather, who famously died by getting shot through the eye while he was getting a massage. So it's like, him getting this news about, Chili will be fine as long as Momo's alive, while we're watching Alex Rocco get a massage, means we immediately get the sense that death is coming. It's like a foreshadowing of Momo's death in the very next scene. So I really love the use of that also. Like I said, that cannot be a coincidence. There's no way. And also talking about that, and how Chili's love of movies is here. Like when we watch Chili watch Touch of Evil, is almost as satisfying as actually watching Touch of Evil. And then there's the great moment when he's having the conversation with Delroy Lindo about Rio Bravo, and Delroy Lindo mistakenly says El Dorado. And when Chili corrects him and says it was Rio Bravo, he seems genuinely offended that he got that wrong and didn't know which movie it was. And that's just kind of the perfect mindset to go into a movie like this that talks about the movie industry in that sort of really straightforward way, but also in that loving way at the same time. Sort of pretty much the way Chili sees the movie industry as the movie goes on, and all the other characters also. There's the great moment, because we talk about Delroy Lindo being like the formidable villain in this, who's really great. He gets lines like, I've seen better film on teeth, stuff like that. And there's even that moment when he's talking about them fixing the Mr. Lovejoy script. And, of course, Bo is this sort of outsider character, yet he's explaining to Chili the script-making process, the writing process, and it's like, there's some stuff that he gets really wrong, and there's stuff that he gets really right also. Like when he's talking about how, it's really easy, you just put the ideas down on paper. Which, of course, it's significantly harder than that. But then he comes in with, it doesn't matter, even if we wanted to go through and do, the proofreading and all that, it doesn't matter because there are existing professional scripts that currently are big movies that are riddled with misspellings and lack of punctuation, and it's like that part he actually does get right. So, and then you have his sidekick, his bodyguard, with a stuntman that's played by James Gandolfini, and this is that character that they kind of tried to do in Be Cool with Elliot that didn't quite work as well, and it's it's sort of that. Something you would see in a classic Hollywood movie from the 30s where the villain has the giant bodyguard, but then they do that thing that is much more, like I said, we see it with Elliot and Be Cool, where it's become a cliche, but Gandolfini makes it work so well where he seems like he's the big intimidating bodyguard, but maybe not so much, especially after he meets somebody like Chili Palmer. But that also leads in that great building up, the kind of villain that Bo is when we have this recurring character of Gandolfini's daughter, and the relationship that she seems to have with Bo, and how there's something like really sweet going on there between the two of them, where it's like he's like the family friend and she trusts him and all that. And then there's the great scene towards the end when Gandolfini's trying to say that he's out, and Bo like holds his daughter, and everything that seemed like really sweet and innocent between the two of them is now like super threatening. And yeah, so his character Bo doesn't get as much screen time as the other stuff that's going on here, but he really does leave that impression and kind of is like the looming villain through the whole thing. And is more of a serious though, because obviously you could say another villain in this case would be Ray Bones, but we learn from the get-go that he's not to be taken near as seriously. Even though he does have his moments later on, but that is kind of the great meshing that the movie does, is it's how it's able to be like a crime movie, and then it goes into the aspect with the movie industry, but there's like it's like a seamless transition between the two worlds and the way they come together, and how they more or less have kind of the same values and the same objectives in a way, and the way it combines that works really well, and how like the violence and the comedy really come together in this perfect way, where like the violence is never too jarring, but it is there enough to be like to have a substantial impact on the crime portion of the movie. But it's usually backed up with a joke, and it's like sometimes you're not sure if something's going to be like straightforward violent, or it's going to be violence that turns into a joke, or both at the same time. Because there's the moment when after Bones has killed the guy, and then Harry manages to get the gun from him, and he points it at Ray's balls, and Ray just kind of says, "No, just cut that out." It's like that could, and that's the thing about Leonard's writing, is that could have been a really serious moment and a real turning point in the story, and it's just immediately cut off with Ray just having to say, "No, just cut that out. Don't do that." He almost seems annoyed by the fact that he was almost killed, but at the same time knew he probably wasn't going to be. And so talking about, while we're on the subject of Harry, that's another thing that meshes really well here and kind of is that sort of transition where we're kind of seeing it happen in real time, is the scenes between Chili and Harry, particularly the earlier scenes, where obviously the probably the most famous scene in the movie when Chili breaks into his house in the middle of the night, and then he starts pitching him the movie. But then there's also the scene when they're meeting Bo for the first time, or Chili's meeting Bo for the first time, and Chili and Harry sort of play, and it's this sort of thing where tonally, like just saying this, it sounds like something that wouldn't work, but the characters and the dialogue and everything about it does make it work, and that is during this scene with Bo when Chili and Harry basically become like an odd couple type, where there's the one that's like the serious one that knows what they're doing, saying, "Whatever you do, don't do this thing and don't do this thing. Whatever you do." And the first thing Harry does is those things. And it's also worth noting that apparently Gene Hackman didn't initially want to play Harry because he didn't think he would, I don't know if he didn't want to do comedies or he didn't think he'd be good at comedies, but I guess Sonnenfeld told him, just, if that's the case, then play it like you're not in a comedy. Just play it as is, just completely straight, and then everything around it will make it funny. And I guess this had an impact on Hackman in regards to his outlook of doing comedies, because it was the very next year that The Birdcage came out. And by the end of that movie, they have him in drag. So I would say this movie made an impression on Hackman as far as doing this sort of genre and going that sort of territory that really worked out. And so then we bring in DeVito's character, of course. And the great thing about DeVito's character is how many jokes he gets in before we even meet him as a character. Like, we see him from a distance once, but for the most part we see like his newspaper headlines and his billboards for his big Napoleon movie that took off. A movie that, like, in '95 the Epic was still working. It was the same year as Braveheart. So you could probably see that doing, but it's like, you watch it now and it's like, Martin Weir's Napoleon movie would never make it in like today. But here in the mid-90s, yeah, it's believable that that would just totally blow up. And then we get into the fact that he's pretty much an Oscar bait actor. And we get into that whole thing where it's, because obviously Harry's saying like Mr. Lovejoy is going to be his Driving Miss Daisy, so it's basically like he started off making his monster movies with Rene Russo being like the scream queen and all that, and now he's trying to transition into literal Oscar bait territory. And these jokes that are thrown Martin Weir's way, like the fact that he's been nominated for 2 Oscars, and when they discuss his career, we know exactly which 2 movies those probably are that he got nominated for. Where it's there was the one where he was like, you know, the mob witness in The Cyclone, and then there was the one where he was the gay crippled mountain climber. And it's like it's always fun to see how people are becoming more and more aware of, like, you know, the Oscar process and what gets in and what doesn't. And it's nice to go back to a movie that's like 25 years old and see that those jokes were, everybody was still aware of that at any given time, since pretty much since the Oscars have existed. So it's really fun to see the jokes like that. And then, yeah, and then we get the whole story turns, we get the side plot with David Paymer that ends up coming into this, and then the whole him faking everybody out at the airport thing, and it's just pretty much scene after scene after scene of just that really slick way everybody gets away with everything, and the people that need to get cornered, and it all ends up working out and becoming this great thing. It's got, you know, the references, it's got the cameos like Bette Midler and Penny Marshall, and it's basically everything that Be Cool tries to do, but just manages to fall short. And so going into Be Cool, it is worth noting that I praise what Barry Sonnenfeld did here, but then they didn't just hand Be Cool off to a nobody. It's F. Gary Gray, who has like a really diverse filmography when it comes to the kind of stuff that he's touched on, whether it be everything from Set It Off to Friday. So there couldn't have been an immediate problem right there. Like, it's the kind of movie where you look at the cast, you look at the director, and you look at the movie it's following, and you're like, this probably should work on many levels. And so you go into it, and of course, you know, with the sort of meta nature that Get Shorty had going on, this one is, and obviously we're getting more into an area now. We're 10 years after the fact. We're being meta is becoming more and more commonplace. Not near as much as it is now, but we were getting there. And so it was all about the self-referential thing and the fact that it was a sequel, so it's like, let's do the whole, you know, talking about sequel thing. Basically the Scream 2 angle. But Scream 2's script is significantly smarter than a lot of the attempts at that kind of thing in Be Cool, because we immediately start off. There's no chance to catch your breath. We immediately start off with the self-referential sequel talk, where Travolta's driving around with James Woods, and they're talking about how they did a sequel to the movie that they were making at the end of Get Shorty, and maybe it wasn't so great, and maybe it didn't pay off so well, and it's like, you can't tell if you go back. And it's like, I wonder if they foresaw that this was not going to be a movie that was near Get Shorty's caliber. And so it makes you question, is this like genuinely them taking shots at themselves and it's like, oh, a sequel thing and they're hoping they can build on that? Or is it also kind of working as damage control, where it's like the movie comes out and it's not up to par with the movie that came before it? So it's like, yeah, but we're aware that sequels usually aren't better, and it's like, I don't know. And honestly, though, there's one thing in this scene, and maybe this is a bit nitpicky, but I don't care. It annoys the shit out of me, because so many people reference it and parrot what they hear Chili say in this scene. Now, of course, one of the big self-referential jokes at the beginning of this movie is the fact that, obviously, Get Shorty was an R-rated movie. It had the violence and language and all that stuff. Whereas Be Cool has been knocked down to PG-13. And one of the first things they talk about in the movie is Chili saying, there's so much that you can't get away with in a PG-13 movie. And in a PG-13 movie, you can only say fuck once. And he just says fuck right then. And it's like, see? The movie's PG-13, and that's what he did, and that's it. And I don't know, the reason this bothers me is because so many people reference this scene about all those PG-13 movies that used their fuck that one time. Only trouble is the rule is actually 3. There's like one or two movies that got away with 4, but you can get away with at least 3 in a PG-13 movie. If you've seen, As Good as It Gets, or The Social Network and The Martian got away with 2. There's so many that pass that barrier, but usually they just use the one for like the ultimate emphasis on a particular moment. Like for instance here. But yeah, Chili doesn't quite regardless of how long Chili has apparently been in the movie industry, not quite that, that is not quite right. But anyway, so it kind of continues on with the whole reference thing. Like, it's obviously, we talked about how, suited, Leonard's writing is to somebody like Tarantino. And how 2 years after Get Shorty, Tarantino would make Jackie Brown out of Rum Punch. And then we have here, where we have Uma Thurman as the lead to John Travolta's co-lead, and we also have Harvey Keitel in here, and it's like, is this what you're trying to do? Because, and yeah, he and Uma Thurman dance, and he says he's from Brooklyn and stuff like that. And then you have Harvey Keitel in here, and it's like, not only is it the Pulp Fiction thing, but it's like, Harvey Keitel being here almost feels like one, despite his major character, every time we see Harvey Keitel, it just feels like one long in-joke to the final scene in Get Shorty, where it's revealed, because at the beginning, or in the middle of Get Shorty, Bo says, we can get, somebody like Harvey Keitel to play Bones or something, and then at the end of the movie, Harvey Keitel plays Bones. And so now that you have Keitel in the movie, it's kind of jarring and weird. To their credit, I believe James Woods was supposed to play the Keitel part, but there was like a scheduling conflict, so he just played Athens instead in the opening scene. Another Pulp Fiction reference would be when James Woods gets shot in the opening scene, it's because Chili went to the bathroom. And it's like, obviously, there's that theme in Pulp Fiction. Every time Vincent goes to the bathroom, something horrible happens. Yeah, they're everywhere. And there's probably so many references you probably don't even catch all of them, but that's not even... That might sound like a compliment, but kind of not really. So... And like I was saying, also talking about, you need stuff from Get Shorty as much as we can get. Renee Russo just kind of disappears between movies, but the way she bounced around she started at Martin, then she ended up with Harry, then she ended up with Chili. I'm guessing we're supposed to assume she probably just kept bouncing off. So now you have Martin Weir does appear. Despite what I said at the very beginning of this video, Martin Weir is in this movie for like a split second. I'm almost positive they just caught up with Danny DeVito in a couple of places, at the Viper Room or at a basketball game, and just sort of filmed him for a second, and that was it. That's Martin Weir's appearance in this movie, despite Danny DeVito's prominent billing for some reason. It's to really give you the idea that it's a sequel to Get Shorty, kind of, until you realize how bamboozled you are when you get in there. But, continuing on, we do have some new characters. And that was the great thing about Get Shorty, was all these side characters, like, Bo and Bear and, David Paymer and all these other people. And here we have, Raji is probably the most notable of the new characters, who is played by Vince Vaughn. And this is something I've never been quite able to figure out. Because if I remember correctly, Raji actually is black in the book. But the joke in Be Cool now is that Raji is played by Vince Vaughn, who thinks he's black. And that's the joke. And in 2005, that seemed to work for a lot of people. And I get it. But nowadays you look back on it, and your first question, I guess, would be, why? Like, you go to the script adaptation process and you start with, okay, we've got Raji, but what if Raji was a white guy pretending to be black instead? And it's like, and we'll cast Vince Vaughn, that's the cherry on top of this, that's what's going to make this joke work. But then you get scenes like the scene when Elliot confronts him and chases him around the car. Elliot, who's played by Dwayne Johnson, still going... I believe this was the last movie he officially went by just The Rock. And he's got a one-note character where he's the big bodyguard. He's like Bear in Get Shorty. Only now the tipping point of this joke is that he's also gay. Like, not only is he the big bodyguard that has a sensitive side, And another, he wants to be famous also. He wants to get that Nicole Kidman movie. Um, but he's also gay, and that's basically all he has to work with. That, and of course, the constant, self-referential thing. He's got that one move, which is the eyebrow thing, which, if you're not caught up on your wrestling history, was his thing. Like it, when I go back and revisit this movie, it's like I almost forget. Oh yeah, that was like his whole deal, and it seems really out of place in the movie now. Like it was such a relevant joke at the time, and it's like it just given where he is now in his career, it just seems weird, and it's like. And like I said, it's just really a one joke thing, and that's what happens with Raji and Elliot here is they're one jokes, and this scene I'm talking about, where Elliot's chasing him around the car. Now, talking about, we were talking about with Get Shorty, where Travolta said, you've got to keep the Leonard dialogue, because that's the heart. That's the blood flowing through its veins, as that dialogue keeping it alive, and going, outside of the whole, oh, it's just a movie script and it's a dumbed down thing. So, what they decided to do here, apparently, was have Vince Vaughn improvise. Now, here's the thing, is, number one, it's one thing to abandon Leonard dialogue to improvise, because improvising does not always work, but you do have Vince Vaughn, and Vince Vaughn can improv with the best of them. All the problems with this scene, I don't put on Vince Vaughn in any way, because that's the thing, is you tell Vince Vaughn to improv, but the trouble is he's still stuck in a box because Raji is a one-joke character. You push Vince Vaughn into this scene and you say, alright, improvise. But the thing is your character is white and thinks he's black. Go. And you can tell that's all Vaughn could come up with. That's all he had because of the box this one-note character puts him into. You have that character and you tell him to improvise. What else can he do but what we see on screen? And the scene becomes a dead end because of this. And it just stops. There is like no point to this scene. Yeah, there's the Elliot confronting him, but then the scene just becomes like the scene doesn't even have an end. It just is Vince Vaughn doing this until the scene just stops. And there's no direction at all. And there's no real punchline or payoff. It's just they threw Vince Vaughn out into the wild and wished him the best of luck. So stuff like that's really unfortunate and really plays up. Just how the characters don't work as well, especially when you give them like one trait. And you think that's going to work through a feature-length movie, when it clearly only goes so far. And then you have stuff that just kind of feels shady. Just kind of makes you feel dirty. Like, this was the last movie with Robert Pastorelli, who you probably remember. He was in stuff like... He'd done Michael with Travolta. He was also like the villain in Striking Distance with Bruce Willis and stuff like that. He was here and there. And probably a face you recognize. But the thing about it is, this movie came out like almost a year after his death. And it's... to me, anyway, not to get necessarily too dark talking about a movie like Be Cool, but I mean, if you do your research on Robert Pastorelli and what he had going on leading up to his death, and some trouble he'd found himself into, it's really weird and shady that he plays a character in his final movie whose living is shooting people. Like I said, if you don't know what I mean by that, just go to Robert Pastorelli's Wikipedia page and decide for yourself if giving him this role was in good taste or not, especially since it's his last role. So that's, yeah, I'll just leave that at that. But then, of course, we have Christina Milian as a new character, and she's the wannabe pop star that gets discovered and could potentially be the new big thing. And this is when I think Be Cool finds its biggest obstacle that keeps it from being the great thing that Get Shorty is. And that is this shift in what business they're focusing on. And to an extent what they're trying to do a bit of a satire on, which they did so well in Get Shorty with the movie industry. Now they're trying to do it in Be Cool with the music industry. which when you see Chili's character in Get Shorty seems so out of left field that suddenly this is Chili's new thing. It almost feels like it makes Chili feel more like a fad guy rather than the really passionate movie lover that we saw in Get Shorty, watching Touch of Evil, knowing Harry Zim and Rene Russo's whole fucking monster movie filmography. The scene when he's in the parking garage with Bear and he's like, I did some work on stuff, but you wouldn't know. And he's like, dude, I know movies. Whatever movie you say, I'm gonna know it. Not only that, I'm gonna know like all the dialogue in it. And now he's just a music guy now. Just because? I don't know. And that's the thing here is, like, when you watch Get Shorty, that love of movies just comes off the screen. Not just from Chili, but from the movie itself. And with Be Cool, the music scenes are like filler. There is so much music filler in this movie. This movie is 2 hours long, and so much of that is us listening to Christina Milian sing, while people look at each other like, yep, she's going to be big. She's definitely going to be big. Then she performs with Steven Tyler. There's just so much music filler. And not even just the Christina Milian scenes. There's the dance scene between Travolta and Uma Thurman where it's like, hey, you know, Vincent and me, and there we just get a Black Eyed Peas performance, which feels like it's more of the focus of the scene than even the dancing, even though the dancing has nothing to do with anything at all, except to say, hey, Pulp Fiction happened. So, yeah, so, and that's the thing, too, is it's like, it's such a weird choice. Like, if it was any other kind of music, maybe, but the fact, talking about it almost being like a fad thing is it's like, yeah, it does. It's one thing that it's exploring the music industry, but it's another thing that it's exploring a genre of music that can often seem soulless. Because it's like, yeah, you have like your Britney Spears or your Christina Aguilera's or whatever, but a lot of the time, you know, pop music can just be this person's like the pop singer of the week. And that's what it feels more like the Christina Milian character is, despite the fact that the characters are endlessly trying to build up she's going to be the next big thing. But the music scenes are just so there and soulless and, like I said, filler that you just don't get the vibe of what they're going for. You can see the movies they're building up to and Get Shorty, why those would probably succeed. And with the music in Be Cool, it just feels like another one of those things. And even if she is the kind of character that would break out in the music industry, that doesn't change the music. Like, there's people that break out in the music industry constantly that just have a very generic sound or vibe or whatever. And she would probably have just been another one of those. And that's the movie's focus. That's what all these characters are surrounding. All these colorful characters. And I just don't know. I feel like there's a lot more we can do with other better subplots. Like, everything with Cedric the Entertainer. Cedric the Entertainer, I think, Sin LaSalle is one of my favorite of the newer characters in all his scenes. Him and Andre Benjamin. And Andre Benjamin is kind of doing the same thing that The Rock is doing with Elliot, where it's like the character has the one joke where he's probably supposed to seem threatening, but he's anything but, where he's like sipping the tea and all that. But I think it's almost funnier with Andre than it is with The Rock, weirdly. That scene where the gun accidentally goes off and he just drops it and he's like, you know what? Don't even give me a gun. That's like some of the funniest stuff in the movie. And all that stuff also where it's like, you have all this stuff that's supposed to be funny that's not really working, and then it's just something throwaway that ends up actually being funny. Like whenever somebody's in Uma Thurman's house and like nobody can get comfortable on her furniture, for some reason that's just kind of like low-key, you know, funny in itself, funnier than the other stuff that's supposed to be the bigger laughs in the movie. So yeah, and then it gets really dependent on, it obviously is really dependent on like the cameos and the references, and it's like I was saying, not only do they show the love of movies and Get Shorty, but they set the background. You know, the references and the cameos and all that stuff. But like I said, in Be Cool, they're just sort of here, and they keep trying to reuse the same stuff that Get Shorty did, like the scene where Chili breaks into in Rene Russo's house and turns the TV on and lures Harry down into the living room, and then Bo does it to him with Rio Bravo later, and it's like there's the one thing and then there's the callback. They do that scene in Be Cool like 4 times. And it's because it's supposed to echo the scenes in Get Shorty, and pretty much nothing else. It's not calling back on anything that's in its own movie, just in the stuff that's around it. And obviously that's not going to land near as much or seem as, well thought out. So, yeah. And obviously, the dialogue feels totally absent. I think the only time we get anything that really feels like the Elmore Leonard dialogue, probably the closest thing would be Cedric the Entertainer's monologue before he shoots the Russian. And it's like, well, you see that and you're like, wow, this movie could have used a lot more of that and a lot less of the music bullshit, but here we are. So, yeah. So you can see where, like, it has the same ideas and it wanted to do the same thing and it has the same structure, but it's like, I feel like just changing the medium from movies to music in general was kind of the death curse from the get-go. But there's so much other stuff that's not working, where they're trying to do what Get Shorty did, and it's like, and I can understand trying to stay in, like, the same vein as the movie that came before, but it's abundantly clear they were just kind of trying to use the same beats, and they just weren't hitting really much at all. That's not to say that Be Cool is entirely worthless. There can be a sort of a guilty pleasure just watching this cast, and, doing what they can and all that. And there is something that's not entirely devoid of a fun aspect. But I mean, when you're looking at the two together, it makes Be Cool look borderline terrible. But I wouldn't say Be Cool is a terrible movie or anything like that. But obviously Get Shorty is like miles and miles ahead of it and above it. So, yeah. So that's what we have here. The next one, I had a next one in mind, but I'm not sure if that's the one I want to do or not. I might change my mind and do something else. But regardless, there'll be another one at some point. And then next week's reviews being Spencer Confidential on Netflix, as well as Onward and The Way Back, and they did Emma again. I might see if I can find Guns Akimbo and see what the hell that's all about. And yeah, hopefully that'll be what the next review video is, and then another one of these, and so on. So until all that stuff, I think that's it for this.